we want to skip ahead, and we're skipping over quite a chunk of history in terms of the transfer from England to the United States, the history involved in that, as well as the history involved in the treaty-making relationships, and to kind of jump ahead to how the Doctrine of Discovery has been used in case law supporting the taking of the land in America. And really the first case before the Supreme Court that addressed the Doctrine of Discovery was in 1823, Johnson v. McIntosh. And in this case, Johnson had purchased some land from a tribe. The land was later taken by the United States government, and McIntosh purchased the land from the United States government. There was a dispute as to who had clear title, whether it was Johnson or McIntosh. And at that time, because of the Trade and Intercourse Acts, which prohibited the dealings with tribes by individuals not associated with the government, the court found that Native Americans did not have the right to sell their land, and therefore it was McIntosh who owned the land because he got clear title from the government. Now, what's important about this case is it affirms the right of Europeans to discover land and exclude other Europeans from that land, as well as to subjugate the rights of the indigenous population. The court states that the rights of the Indians to do with their land as they see fit has been diminished because discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it. And the court goes on to say that our whole country has been granted by the Crown, while in the occupation of the Indians, these grants purport to convey the soil as well as the right of dominion to the grantees. And I think that's important for two things, because again we see that curious word right, and how is right being defined, and who defines right, and how did this right come to be? Well, in this case, the right comes from the grant by the Crown. But if you remember, this grant was about conversion of the Indian people to Christianity. In essence, it's a religious document. And somehow Chief Justice Marshall attempts to sidestep the separation of church and state and utilizes what is, in essence, a religious document to justify the United States' position now in 1823. In 1831, the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia is the second case decided by Chief Justice Marshall, which addressed the state of Georgia's enactment of a series of laws stripping the Cherokees of their rights under the laws of the state of Georgia. And in essence, the Cherokee Nation had filed suit with the Supreme Court requesting an injunction, a legal decree stopping the actions of Georgia, because they asserted, in essence, that the Georgia state legislature had created laws by which to annihilate the Cherokees as a political entity. The Supreme Court determined that they did not have jurisdiction to hear the case based upon Article 3 of the Constitution. Article 3 of the Constitution provides that the court has jurisdiction to decide controversies between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens or subjects of foreign states. The Cherokee Nation is not a state, and it is not a foreign state, the court said. The court determined that the Cherokee had a right to the land that they occupied, but they were not a foreign state. Rather, the Cherokee were denominated domestic dependent nations, and they likened the relation to the United States as one that resembles that of a ward to his guardian. And that reiterates not only the doctrine of discovery, but also congressional plenary power over the tribes. And as we see, that Congress has the ultimate authority when it comes to tribes. The third case in what's been known as the Marshall Trilogy is Worcester versus Georgia. And this addressed a Georgia law requiring all European Americans residing in Cherokee territory to obtain a state license. So in essence, if you lived in Georgia and you wanted to reside in Cherokee country, you had to get a license from the state of Georgia to do so. Worcester and several of the missionaries who were residing in Cherokee country did not get the required license and were arrested for not having the license. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that Georgia could not exercise the powers over the Cherokee because the acts of Georgia interfere with treaties between the federal government and the Cherokee, and essentially are in hostility with the acts of Congress and giving effect to the treaties. In confirming its reason, the court again reiterates the doctrine of discovery. And one interesting quote from the case, the court provides, "But power, war, conquest give rights, which after possession are conceded by the world, and which can never be controverted by those on whom they descend." And again, we go back to this idea of rights. The decision further outlined the doctrine of discovery because it provided that while Indian nations have been considered distinct and independent political communities that retained original natural rights, their rights were essentially diminished. And one of the ways in which their rights were diminished was that they could no longer engage in trade with other European nations, in trade of their land, and engage in those types of arrangements with other European nations. Then in essence, America, the United States, owned the land. The Cherokee, as well as all other native tribes, had rights that were diminished. And these treaties that were entered into could only be entered into by the United States government and the tribes, and the acts of Georgia were interfering with these treaty rights. But while it affirmed the treaty rights, it did not affirm the rights of, in this case, the Cherokee Nation as an independent and distinct foreign nation. What we begin to see is this formulation of the doctrine of discovery and reaffirming the rights of the United States and England. The United States is a successor in interest from England. And this continues on because of a divergence from Christian values, European values, when the tribes and European nations came to know one another, for lack of a better word. European nations had a right to assert power over them. And because the European nations had the military ability to do so, it's justified. And I think what we see is a legal justification, and we go back to that idea of the natural rights, those rights which are given to us by nature, or under this idea, those rights given to us by God, by culture, form the basis of our legal rights, those rights which are customary, and kind of underscore our normative values. And you combine that with strength, military, and you have not only the legal justification, but then the means to implement. And we see how this is played out.